What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we've got our Week 11 fantasy football running back starts and sits for every single matchup. So make sure to tune in. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. And let us hear it in the comment section. Do you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them all. But with that being said, let's get right into it. Real quick, before getting into our breakdown, a quick word from our partners at Prize Picks, which is our favorite DFS site of choice this NFL and fantasy football season. If you guys aren't familiar with them, do yourself a favor and check them out. In fact, when you sign up right now and use code ADP, you get a 100% deposit match up to $100. And look, we're already doing all this research for fantasy football matchups. So why not take advantage of it and get some profits as well? Prize Picks, well, they allow you to basically do exactly that. They have so many different player prop bets, not only in terms of single stat DFS, but also in terms of fantasy score. And you can combine them any which way you want. Super simple, super easy to use. All you have to do, choose two more players from the board, and then just pick the over-under on their projected fantasy score or on their single stat. Again, pretty much for every single matchup as the week progresses, those options will be updated even more so. And then the great thing is you've got two different options in terms of how you want to bet it, whether it's a flex play, so that way you can miss one of your selections but still win. Obviously, that's the safer choice. Or if you want more bang for your buck, check out the power play, where if you get all your picks correct, well, you win even bigger. So again, check all of that out. Details in the description. And we kick off Week 11 on Thursday night with the Patriots at the Falcons. And all in all, this is a matchup where mostly you're going to be keeping an eye out for injuries at the primary running back spots. For the Patriots, Damien Harris, he was out this last week with a concussion. And with a short turnaround, there's no guarantee that he will be able to suit up on Thursday. If that's the case, then Rhamondre Stevenson, who was able to play, he was an absolute stud for the Patriots versus the Browns. He can absolutely do that again versus this pretty bad Falcons defense. Now, the question becomes, what do you do with Stevenson if Damien Harris is active? Because then Stevenson will more than likely be in that secondary role. And in that case, I would view Damien Harris as the preferred start, probably a low-end RB2 in standard formats. Obviously, in that case, the ceiling for this entire running back room for the Patriots is greatly lowered because, they're going to use them all to some extent. So it's going to limit the volume for all of these guys. But the good thing is it is a really nice matchup. So there is still some decent touchdown upside, things like that. For the Falcons, same situation, but Cordero Patterson, depending on if you can play him at the running back position, which in most formats you can. He got a little bit banged up versus the Dallas Cowboys, didn't return. Now, to be fair, that game was an absolute blowout. The Falcons didn't do anything, got obliterated by the Dallas Cowboys, so there really wasn't any reason for starters to potentially return. So maybe it was that. There's no official word on if Patterson could potentially miss time, anything like that. But again, it's a short turnaround, so you just have to keep an eye out on that. And I would say if he does play, then I would sit Mike Davis. And I have Mike Davis as a potential start only, and I mean only if Cordero Patterson doesn't play, because then I think Mike Davis is going to get pretty much utilized kind of like Cordero Patterson has been. And to me, that's pretty valuable. Now, I will say other guys here that, are some names to consider. I have as sits. Brendan Bolden. If Damien Harris plays, no thank you. Same with Wayne Gallman. Yes, he got a lot of opportunities this last Sunday for the Falcons, but that, again, the Falcons were down by 40 points pretty quickly at that. So, that's not going to happen all that often. I think it's Mike Davis after Cordero Patterson still. So for that reason, I would be fading Gallman and then Bolden for the Patriots. Moving on, though, we've got the Ravens at the Bears. Only one name I want to start here. That is David Montgomery for Chicago in his first game back last week prior to the bye week. Montgomery, well, he got his normal usage. Matt Nagy ended up being truthful in that Khalil Herbert pretty much went away. So, that was kind of nice while it lasted, but that's why we've got him as a sit at this point in time. I like Montgomery's chances here versus the Ravens. I think he can be a high-end RB2. However, for Baltimore, if Latavius Murray returns, I really don't like this backfield. Devonta Freeman was okay as like an emergency plug-in guy, but it was still Lamar Jackson that was doing the bulk of the carrying of this backfield. So with Latavius Murray returning, honestly, I'd probably prefer Devonta Freeman, but I think Murray is just going to take away so many carries from all of these other running backs as well that it's just going to make a situation to avoid. If Murray doesn't play, then if you're desperate, maybe take a chance on Devonta Freeman, but I think it's a matchup again where it's not setting up in the best possible way for Freeman. So again, ideally, I would avoid the Baltimore backfield in Week 11. Then we've got the Packers at the Vikings. This one is simple. You start both guys. A.J. Dillon, notice no Aaron Jones. That is because he got hurt in Week 10 versus Seattle, MCL injury. He is expected to miss between 1 and 2 weeks. So honestly, best case scenario for Aaron Jones and all those Aaron Jones owners. Hopefully you handcuff Jones with A.J. Dillon so you'll be okay during that period, because Dillon does become an RB1 while Aaron Jones is out. He showed it versus Seattle, and we've known that would be the case as he is one of the top handcuffs in fantasy football, and I feel pretty good about playing him versus the Vikings. For Minnesota, well, Dalvin Cook, even though he's got some off-the-field potential concerns, things like that, he still played in Week 10, and I'd start him here versus the Green Bay Packers. I think he is also in the RB1 conversation for Week 11. Moving on, we've got the Colts at the Bills, and here, again, only one name I want to start. That is Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. The guy has been arguably the best running back in football and in fantasy these last couple of weeks. He's finally getting the usage that we all hoped and knew that he could handle, and it's been absolutely awesome. Now, it's a little bit of a tougher matchup versus the Bills, but I still think he will be an RB1 on the week. For Buffalo, it's a different, story here because Singletary, Zach Moss, yes, they had successes this last week, and hell, even Matt Breida, who I included, who actually had the most success, but that was versus the New York Jets. The Colts are a different team. They're better. And first and foremost, don't go chasing the points with Breida. He is the third string running back here. But with Singletary and Moss both healthy, I continue to say it. These are guys that are going to vulture each other, and they're going to negate each other's opportunities and just greatly decrease their upside. So I would sit them due to that. Also sitting Naheem Hines. The guy just, honestly, I've been saying it for a while. He's droppable. Isn't contributing it that much as a pass catcher. Jonathan Taylor is handling the bulk of the carries, really isn't going anywhere else, so Hines is a sit as well. Afterwards, Lions at the Browns, and here we like both starting running backs. DeAndre Swift went absolutely ham versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. You start him again, he is a PPR cheat code. For the Browns, Nick Chubb didn't play this last week. He was on the COVID list, but I anticipate that he will return in Week 11, which if that's the case, then you play him pretty confidently versus this Lions defense. As far as the sits are concerned, Jamal Williams, a sit for the Lions. Yes, he's been banged up the last couple of weeks, so it's not even a guarantee that he plays. I wouldn't get cute with any of the other running backs that had some success versus the Steelers for the Lions last week. I think that was more so an aberration than anything else. And then also D'Ernest Johnson. If Nick Chubb plays, we've seen this before. Johnson, yes, he's good on his own when he gets the bulk of the carries, but when Nick Chubb is there, he's the primary guy, and Johnson has a very small secondary role. So for that reason, I would sit him in that scenario. Then Washington at the Panthers. Go figure, the 1 week we say, well, the game script isn't going to favor Gibson and that you should probably consider benching him. He has his best week of the year. A really bizarre game, but hey, maybe that bye week is what Gibson needed and Washington can kind of unleash him now. I will say this Panthers defense is pretty good still against the run, so I wouldn't get my hopes up too much, but, Gibson as a mid-level RB2, if he continues to get that usage, I like him there. Just, both these running backs, Gibson and McKissic, worth mentioning, are very, very game script dependent. If Washington is getting blown out, it's usually going to be a J.D. McKissic type of performance. If they're in it, usually Antonio Gibson. But that's just so hard to predict that, you kind of have to go game by game. I think this game won't be a complete blowout one way or the other. So for that reason, I would start Gibson. And then for Carolina, it's pretty simple. Christian McCaffrey, once he returned back healthy, he has been a must start, and we've seen why. The guy is an absolute monster. Even without scoring touchdowns, he's getting all the catches, all the receptions. PPR cheat code, top 3 running back in fantasy. Then Texans at the Titans. There's only really one name that I would take a chance on here. It's Foreman for the Tennessee Titans, because we saw it last week. Yes, the Titans made some news by signing Adrian Peterson with Derrick Henry out, but Peterson hasn't really done all that much. This last week versus the Saints, Foreman actually had more carries than Adrian Peterson. Peterson didn't look all that great. I kind of anticipate that Foreman will get more opportunities going forward. This Texans defense is awful. So I think, Foreman can be a decent dart throw in week 11. For all those reasons, I'm sitting Peterson. I don't think this backfield can have multiple, fantasy relevant guys. So I'll pass on Peterson. Then for the Texans, I'm passing on David Johnson and Phillip Lindsay. Their best running back, by the looks of it, was Mark Ingram, who's now with the New Orleans Saints via that trade. And neither one of these guys are really doing all that much. Even with Tyrod Taylor back, I still don't trust this rushing attack. So no thank you to Johnson or Lindsay. Then 49ers at the Jaguars. You start Elijah Mitchell. Now, again, at the time of this recording, the 49ers are yet to play. But Mitchell, up until now has been very good. Despite guys like Wilson returning, despite guys like Jermichael Hasty, Sermon, et cetera, and this is a really nice matchup, so I like Mitchell as a high-end RB2. For the Jaguars, James Robinson returned this last week. Took him a little bit to get it going, but, he kind of was unleashed towards the end of the game and put in a respectable performance. I think he can do the same. Probably a high-end RB2 versus the 49ers as well, but he does have a higher ceiling than that of Elijah Mitchell. And then I would sit Carlos Hyde. Maybe some people might still be worried about the heel of James Robinson, but I think we saw towards the end of that game versus the Colts that James Robinson kind of got into his own groove. So Hyde to me becomes a sit and pretty much just a handcuff moving forward. Then Dolphins at the Jets. Is it an odd week? Then play Myles Gaskin. No, look, I'm kidding when I say that, but it's kind of been weird how Myles Gaskin has absolutely sucked on even weeks, and then on odd weeks he's been all right, but obviously that's not really any analysis. The analysis itself is the Dolphins are playing the Jets. The Jets are a great matchup pretty much across the board for all positional groups. That's why you want to play Myles Gaskin, who's doing most of his damage as a pass catcher. That's why I think you mainly prioritize him in PPR formats as a mid-level RB2. For the Jets, Michael Carter. Without Mike White, it doesn't really matter what happens at the quarterback position. Michael Carter has become the main running back here of choice. And I said it last week, with Coleman expected to return, Ty Johnson was a sit for me, kind of played out that way. And I continue to say that moving forward. Carter has the highest upside. I think he's also kind of in that mid to low end RB2 category, similar to a Myles Gaskin here. Then Saints at the Eagles. Now, notice asterisk next to Alvin Kamara's name. That is because he missed this last week with a knee injury. Now, it didn't seem that serious. Otherwise, there probably would have been more news coming out surrounding that. But we don't necessarily know. So, if he plays, you start him, Alvin Kamara. Obviously, he's an RB1. If he doesn't, then Mark Ingram. He filled in very admirably for Kamara. And I think he can do the same yet again versus the Eagles. So I like him in that scenario. If Kamara does play, I would be fading Ingram. However, for the Eagles, this is a little bit tough because, Howard and Boston Scott have both been getting opportunities and putting up all right numbers, like close to 100 yards. I will say mainly I'm looking at the Eagles running backs in standard formats. Don't like the upside in PPR. And also, even though Scott and Howard both had decent performances this last week versus Denver, I think the Saints defense is better, and I don't see two fantasy relevant running backs coming out of this game. If I had to take a chance on one of these guys, it would have to be Howard. I think he's been a little bit more consistent than Scott. But again, honestly, with both of them healthy right now, with a tougher matchup, and I could see, this potentially being a game where the Eagles struggle a little bit more so than last week. If you want to make the case that Howard and Scott should both be benched, especially in PPR formats, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you there either. Then we go to the Bengals at the Raiders. I'll start Joe Mixon. That's pretty easy there. He's an RB1. He's been great so far this season, and he's got a good matchup versus the Raiders. For Las Vegas, Josh Jacobs. He's the guy that's just getting the more opportunities compared to Kenyon Drake, so you continue to play him. I think he's a low to mid-level RB2. Definitely game script dependent. Kenyon Drake, just way too inconsistent. 2 weeks ago, he had a really nice game, but it's just so dependent on how much volume he gets week to week. And similar to the other pass catchers on this Raiders offense, that's very hard to predict. I mean, when Darren Waller isn't producing, who was by far and away your best pass catcher, it's tough for me to say that Kenyon Drake is going to be reliable on a week-to-week basis. So for that reason, I have him as a sit here. Afterwards, Cowboys at the Chiefs. Ezekiel Elliott is a start. That's pretty obvious. He's in the RB1 category. Tony Pollard did some damage this last week versus the Falcons, but again, that was versus the Falcons. This is going to be versus the Chiefs. I don't expect the Cowboys to win 40 plus to like 3, as was the case here versus the Falcons. I think this will be a much closer game, so I would sit Tony Pollard. For Kansas City, interesting. Does Clyde Edwards-Helaire return this week? There's a possibility. If that's the case, I would play him. I still think the Chiefs are probably going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, we're going to give you another chance to be our guy. Darrell Williams, the way he's been utilized has been great. Let's see if the Chiefs allow Clyde Edwards-Helaire to kind of go in that role. Obviously, if CH doesn't play, then Darrell Williams is a start, a high-end RB2. And if CH does play, then I would be fading Darrell Williams because, again, it's just going to take away a lot in terms of opportunities. Then we go to the Cardinals at the Seahawks. Here, I'll start James Conner. Now, I really hope for the sake of this Cardinals offense that Kyler Murray returns because in those scenarios, this offense has a lot more scoring upside. So James Conner and really whoever the running back is going to have a lot more scoring opportunities. Now, Chase Edmonds, he's still hurt, so obviously that's why you don't see his name here. I think Conner can be in high-end RB2 if Kyler Murray returns. For Seattle, is Chris Carson going to return from his neck injury? He could have potentially done that versus the Packers this last week. It didn't happen. If he returns, I'll play him. If he doesn't, Alex Collins still got the majority of the carries. Yes, I realize nothing really happened, but that was, in my opinion, kind of a one-off game versus the Green Bay Packers. I think the Seahawks offense will be much better moving forward. So I would take a chance, a flyer on Collins. Yes, he has a much lower upside than Chris Carson. I think he's a low-end RB2 probably at best, but still, I think he should get the volume. So for that reason, in what will probably be a bounce-back effort from the Seattle offense, I would take a chance on him there. Moving on, Steelers at the Chargers. Pretty simple. You start both the starting guys here. The two studs, Najee Harris, Austin Eckler. The Steelers were absolutely just steamrolled on the ground this last week. I'm not saying that the Chargers will do the exact same thing, but Austin Eckler is somebody that I really like. Both these guys, including Najee Harris versus a Chargers team that generally struggles with their run defense, are in the RB1 category for Week 11. Then Giants at the Buccaneers. Last game of the week here. It's still probably pretty early, but no words on Saquon Barkley and what's happening with his ankle. I've said earlier, it wouldn't shock me if he just doesn't play again this season. But, kind of treating this as status quo in terms of the last couple of weeks. Devontae Booker as the starting running back. Yes, it's a tough matchup versus the Buccaneers, but I think that Booker can be in that RB2, low-end RB2 range, especially when you throw in some pass catching abilities in PPR formats for the Bucs. Leonard Fournette, for a while, pretty much since week 1, he has been The only running back for fantasy purposes worth starting for the Bucks. I'm not backing away from that. I think he also has, I'd say though, high-end RB2 upside here, and then sitting Ronald Jones and Giovanni Bernard. Obviously, if Saquon Barkley returns, a quick note for the Giants, then you sit Devontae Booker. And honestly, maybe even sit Saquon Barkley because first game back from injury versus a good Buccaneers defense. You don't want to get too cute there. So from that perspective, just something to keep in mind. But with that, we wrap up our Week 11 fantasy football running back starts and sits for every single matchup. And as always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them all. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at alldaypigskin to continue interacting with us there. But in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.